get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him. Dwyer? I'm not talking about you, Dwyer. I said Dwyer.
Though more than 900 Americans had died, Richard Dwyer and other U.S. Embassy officials would later receive medals and promotions. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit was subsequently filed by Congressman Ryan.
How Father was so nice, and you had to call him Father. You just never said anything bad about the place, because if you did...
Conditions had never been easy.
You have Walter Heady, the chairman of the John Birch Society. And then you had the lieutenant governor of state.
The size of his congregation gave him a political power base. During the 1976 presidential election campaign, he allegedly provided support for the Democrats and met the presidential candidate's wife. Local politicians sought his support, and he became a member of the city's housing commission.
People from all walks of life were just fascinated by Jim Jones. I mean, I remember going to a testimonial dinner. Who was there at the dinner? You got Angela Davis, the communist, and then you have Walter Heady, the chairman of the John Birch Society. And then you had the lieutenant governor of state of California, you had the mayor, you had the DA, you had the chief of police, you had the supervisors, you had businessmen. They were all there at this meeting, and I thought, Jim, you got your act
He'd
together.
bring all of these people in, and he himself would come in the midst of a smaller a retinue of aides. They'd shoo him to the front of the room, put him on the center of the chair, and basically sort of guard him the whole time. Guys in dark glasses, black suits, the whole thing. It was very unusual.
Jonestown was in its fourth year when Jones arrived in 1977. Conditions had never been easy, but when he took over, the agricultural mission became a labor camp.
Jim had armed guards. I mean, young men and women who were told that they needed to watch everybody, and it kept you working hard. We headed out to the fields, and you vied to go really far out, actually, because you couldn't hear Jim over the loudspeakers.
Jonestown was wired with loudspeakers, and Jim spoke 24 hours a day on it. When he wasn't speaking, the tapes that they'd made of him speaking played on and on and on.
And Jim would make these announcements, and he'd say, I'm sending out some children and some of my aides and other people you won't know who they are to pretend they want to leave. And it's a test, it's a loyalty test. And if anyone comes to you, you're to report them.
You didn't know who it would be, so you just never put the place down, and how much you enjoyed it there, how much you loved the place, and how great he was, and how Father was so nice, and you had to call him Father. You just never said anything bad about the place, because if you did, you would be coming up there that night.
They also told of full-scale rehearsals for mass suicide in the jungle.
I'll talk to psychiatrists, whatever, but I believe I was brainwashed.
But we do understand that it's extremely difficult for anyone to comprehend people being in a cult group, standing by, watching their daughter being beat 75 times as I did, watching children being beat, microphones held to their mouth while they're screaming so that everyone throughout the building that are not in a public meeting can hear them scream also. Going through electric shock treatment where they're screaming. It's incredibly difficult for anyone to believe a story like this.
There are SWAT teams consisting of 50 young men and women dressed in khaki. There's 2 teams of 25 each that are armed with 200 to 300 guns, and that they patrol all day and all night the whole encampment, and that Jim Jones has stated publicly that nobody better try to escape from here because you will be shot.
The methods that Jim Jones used in his cult, the People's Temple, are definitely classical mind control techniques. And according to a book by Michael Myers, which is called Was Jonestown a CIA Medical Experiment, his documentation leads him to conclude that actually Jonestown was run by the CIA. Prior to being Jonestown in the deep jungles of British Guiana, That site was actually under control of what was called the Shalom Project. This was a CIA program for training black mercenaries for warfare in Angola.
I'd gone through a false mass suicide. I went through one talk and I went through one where we actually took a drink and we were told we had an hour to live so that Jones could find out how people would react psychologically.
Turning Jonestown's children against his own enemies was standard practice for Jim Jones, and it delighted him.
I like to kill Greystone and Tombstone. I'll go back and do it right now.
I think that I should take a knife and cut Mr. Tupper all up real good and put poison in him and invite all my relatives over there and have them eat him, and then I'll die.
It was terror. It was living terror living inside Jonestown.
Deborah Layton had escaped Jonestown a few months earlier with bizarre tales of mind control, armed guards, and suicide rehearsals. They are recounted in her new book, Seductive Poison.
The suicide drills were the most frightening and disturbing things there, that we would be awakened from the middle of a dreamless sleep to Jim's voice screaming over the loudspeaker that we were going to die, that we had to come to the pavilion, that mercenaries were coming in to kill us.
She put her concerns in a sworn affidavit to the U.S. State Department months before Congressman Ryan's trip. Congressman Ryan and the journalists arrived in Guyana on Tuesday, November 14th, 1978.
Well, he was such a kind man, so compassionate, didn't get excited about nothing. Oh, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. Just take it easy. It'll be fine. That's just the way he was.
For some time, Ryan had been a thorn in the side of the CIA. He had recently pushed through congressional legislation that curtailed the agency's covert foreign activities. As Ryan prepared for a first-hand look at Jonestown, he was joined by a State Department agent, Richard Dwyer. What he didn't know was that Dwyer was working undercover.
A man named Dwyer was the head of the CIA here. I mean, the CIA had a presence here. It was an unrevealed presence at the time.
I had a premonition about the trip. There was something that just made me feel a great deal of uncertainty.
In 1978, Jackie Spear was the legal aid to San Francisco area Congressman Leo Ryan. They were about to embark on a fact-finding trip to look into reports of abuse and brainwashing at the remote jungle compound known as Jonestown.
I always kind of shake my head in disbelief when they refer to it as a suicide. Those people were not in control of their minds. They had been brainwashed.
The next day, 20 temple members decided they wanted to leave. In a haze of drugs, Jones' world began to fall apart.
Jones reacted angrily when shown a note from a cult member asking the party for help to get away.
Someone came and passed me this note.
Well, that's who we're talking about. He wants to leave his son here. If Jonestown's such a bad place, why does he want to leave his son here? He's the one that I'm just talking about. Yeah, this is the man that wants to leave his son here. People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us. Bill, we will bother nobody. Anybody wants to get out of here can get out of here. We have no problem about getting out of here. They come and go all the time. I don't know what kind of game. People like publicity. Some people do. I don't.
But he said goodbye, apparently calmly. Then he whispered to one of his lieutenants. As the party reached the airport, a man with a knife tried to stab Ryan. The congressman described the attack.
Yeah, he said something about rob and choke and kill and or knife. I don't know. But what he said was he intended to kill him.
The party had now been joined by about 30 cult members who wanted to get away, and the enlarged party walked out towards the aircraft. Congressman Ryan went over to shake the pilot's hand. As the party waited, a tractor and trailer appeared in the background. hidden men opened fire. Congressman Ryan, 2 reporters, and an NBC cameraman were killed. Several other journalists and defectors were injured.
One man who was not executed at the airstrip was Richard Dwyer, the undercover CIA man from the American Embassy, seen here peeling off from Ryan's party seconds before the tractor arrives. Where Dwyer was in the next few hours is key to one of the mysteries that still lies at the heart of the Jonestown tragedy. Having dealt with Congressman Ryan, Jones now turned his insanity on the Temple's faithful.
At this point in time, Jonestown had become surreal. Almost everything that was going on seemed surreal to me. I mean, by this time, I pretty much figured out this guy was mad. But he said, I've never seen or felt Jonestown so peaceful or quiet. And I remember getting a chill just course through my body because Jonestown had never been in more agony, had never been so less together.
From his seat in the pavilion, Jones recorded the last desperate hour of the People's Temple. In front of him, more than 900 of his followers, who were surrounded by guards holding rifles and crossbows. For all but a few, there was no escape. Subsequent medical examinations revealed that many of the dead had been murdered, held down, and injected with cyanide. Jones himself was one of the last to die. A single gunshot to the head sometime around midnight. His killer has never been known. At 3:30 in the morning, when everyone was dead and several hours before anyone arrived, a radio message was sent from Jonestown using a secret CIA channel reporting what it described as a mass suicide. This was the message that shaped our view of Jonestown for years to come, even though the best medical evidence suggests that most of those who died had been murdered. The question then becomes who sent that message. The only functioning radio in the area belonged to the local American intelligence officer, Richard Dwyer. Though he always denied going back to Jonestown that night, the last tape tells a very different story.
Take Dwyer on down to the East House. Get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him. Dwyer? I'm not talking about you, Jar. I said Dwyer.
Though more than 900 Americans had died, Richard Dwyer and other U.S. Embassy officials would later receive medals and promotions. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit was subsequently filed by Congressman Ryan's daughter and the relatives of those who died. The suit described the deaths as a massacre and alleged that Jones was an agent or operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was dismissed on a technicality and never tried.
Here's more from Bob Jimenez in Guyana.
Recovery teams have been removing the dead from Jonestown since Wednesday. Today, as the recovery operation neared what appeared to be the end, the miscalculation was realized. There were not 400 bodies as first thought, but nearly twice that number. Some were found alongside a temple where recovery teams were just starting to work. Air Force Captain John Muscatelli talked to reporters.
The original count of persons found dead at the Jonestown site has been found to be seriously in error. It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site. They were found simply buried under other bodies. There were larger adults that were grouped together, and under their bodies were found the bodies of smaller adults and children.
But the medical team were not the only people in Jonestown that day. During the immediate aftermath, Jeff Brilley was approached by a man in civilian clothes who asked him to guard a large box of documents.
And he said, I'm from the U.S. Embassy. If anybody tries to take this box away from me, shoot them. And I said, you got to be out of your mind. I'm not going to shoot anybody. And he told me that the box was full of sensitive documents and he needed to get those to the U.S. Embassy. I think he probably was CIA.
The documents then disappeared into the CIA, and their contents remain secret to this day. 20 years later, the CIA continues to deny any interest in the People's Temple. They claim that their own file on Jones is empty. But new evidence reveals startling connections between Jones and members of the U.S. intelligence community.
It began with a visit to Guyana by Congressman Leo Ryan, some of his staff, and members of the press. He was later killed, along with 4 other Americans, including Don Harris and Robert Brown of NBC News. After the killings, the Guyanese authorities impounded the first tapes and notes made by the NBC crew.
I had appeared on a public television several months ago with a group of black professionals, mostly psychologists and doctors. They invited me to appear today to provide information that they thought might be that I might be able to help with this forum today, with their research. I appeared in Washington in February before the International Relations Committee and made some statements and some charges and documentation which resulted in the Foreign Affairs Committee, or International Relations Committee, which they call it today. They voted to ask the House Select Committee on Intelligence to investigate my charges. And they are currently investigating those charges by the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Can you tell us what the charges are? Well, the charges basically amounted to CIA contact with both the Burnham government there and with the People's Temple. That originally, it was my belief at the time I went to Washington that the purpose of our involvement there was to support the government of Burnham for commercial reasons, and they used the People's Temple almost as enforcers to help support an unpopular government there to keep control of the government of Guyana. We knew that there had been an article in the San Mateo Times in December of '79 which indicated that the Deputy Chief of Mission there, Richard Dwyer, was in fact the CIA station chief. And he was the one that went to Jonestown with Leo's party, and he claimed to be slightly wounded, but there was a tape made at the time of the murders and suicides there with Jones yelling, "Get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer out of here." And the indications are that it was Dwyer who went back into Jonestown after Leo was murdered and was there at the time. And there's great question as just who shot Jim Jones and why, whether Jones was shot to shut him up. The question also as to how all these people died and just when they died, which is all documented here. But soon I came back from Washington, because of my testimony, I started getting documentation from a Berkeley psychologist called the Penal Colony here, and from the Alliance for Preservation of Religious Liberty in Washington, which indicated other things, one of which was that George Philip Blakey was a top Jones aide, and he was the man who arranged the purchase or the lease of the land in Guyana, provided the money and arranged the lease down there in 1974. He also is tracked now as being a CIA operative in Angola in 1975 with UNITA. He's also the same guy who was the top aide who arranged all this purchase and the finances, is also the husband of Deborah Layton Blakey, who fled Jonestown and made those charges. He's a brother-in-law of Larry Layton, who was acquitted yesterday. And it's interesting to note the Peninsula Times Tribune says yesterday the jury acquitted, in acquitting Layton, the jury appeared to have agreed with the defense contention that Layton was brainwashed and drugged at the time of the shootings, could not be held criminally responsible. But the gist of what I'm getting to is this. I received a lot of documentation, which I will provide you here today, that indicates the strong possibility that Jonestown and the People's Temple was in reality a mass mind control experiment conducted by the CIA as a follow-up to something called MK Ultra, which they conducted from the early 50s through 1974. They used to use the VA hospital and state hospitals. They used the federal and state penitentiaries for their experiments.
Do you think that Jim Jones was actively involved with the CIA?
I do now.
Do you have any conclusions as to how the people died in Jonestown?
Yes, I have part of our documentation here is a report from which is attached here. The chief medical examiner in Guyana is a Dr. Leslie Moto. He reported, and this is attached here, his opinion that more than 700 of those bodies found at Jonestown were not suicide victims but were murdered. he based this on the injection marks in the upper arm. Page 4 of my statement here.
By injection, they died?
Yes, and by gunfire. There were a lot more people killed by gunfire than they've ever admitted so far. We had heard reports that there were 50 of them, approximately 50 men with guns ringing around there, so people couldn't get out, and very few of them did get out. So it's according to the chief medical officer in Guyana, most of the people down there were murdered rather than suicide.
Who is suppressing all of this? Are you implying the CIA was active in the suppression?
Yes, I'm suggesting to you that a lot of things that don't make sense here. I'm suggesting that the long delay in anyone getting in, or the press getting in there, or very many people all getting in there for several days, was caused by a deliberate attempt to manufacture the story, which has now been accepted and sold successfully to the American manufactured days, was caused by a deliberate attempt to manufacture the story, which has now been accepted and sold successfully to the American people.
And what is that story that you think the people are falsely accepting?
That, in effect, this was a large group of disillusioned or disoriented black people who went down to Guyana and who turned their backs on this country and committed suicide, and we might as well, we're get rid of them, and that was just an aberration type of thing. I think that's the story that's been peddled. When you see the documentation here, you'll begin to wonder yourselves why the first reports were 350 people died or 400 people died, and for several days that was reported, and then they started finding more bodies. When the first reports were that 500 fled in the jungle, the people examined the bodies the first time and counted them by name, by types of people, men, women, and children, turned them over. Then a few days later, they claimed to have found 2 and 3 stacks of bodies underneath those. You know, it boggles the mind, the stories that were passed out, but they apparently have gotten away with, I think, with one of the greatest fabrications of recent years.
What significance do you attach to the fact that the leadership of the temple was largely white and the membership of the temple was largely black?
I mentioned that in here. I think that that's part and parcel of the whole thing. I think that this is what caused me very suspicious about this whole experiment, about the possibilities here. The cadre was all white, and yet we think of Jonestown as a bunch of black people who were committed suicide without mentioning that white cadre, and that doesn't quite add up. I think there are racist overtones to the whole thing.
What kind of racist overtones? What are you exactly alleging?
I'm alleging that the media picture that was printed, that was painted rather, and then came out in print and so on, was that you don't have to worry about these people because they're crazy, they'll do anything, and they're not like us. It's my impression at this time that they were conducting some sort of mind control experiments. For example, they had a very modern hospital down there which they bragged about. So modern that in that population they had medical checkups for everyone every day. So there's no need for that unless you're conducting experiments where you're having control groups and you're giving people, and they're giving their vitamins every day. And it's my guess that they were just using them as guinea pigs to see what they could do under isolated circumstances. They take them off into a jungle someplace far away from everybody. They get them there somehow, and then they're able to see how these various drugs work on different groups.
Could you tell us the details of the murders in Guyana, exactly how they were killed, please?
Well, Dr. Mutu, the pathologist at the site in Jonestown, said that 70 to 80% of the bodies had a fresh needle mark in the back of the left shoulder blade at a point they could not have reached themselves, and that the body showed evidence of having been forced to take the shots. And the official coroner's verdict from Matthews Ridge by the Guyanese judge and jury that looked into the situation was that all the people had been murdered, that not one had been a suicide. Mutu found evidence of gunshot wounds and strangulation in many of the other bodies. I studied about 150 pictures in which I could see gunshot wounds. There's no way that cyanide pathology explains the condition of those bodies all face down, and you could see drag marks, and the body count went up because the area was surrounded by 350 Guyanese troops, about 200 British Black Watch troops, which are the equivalent of their Green Beret on maneuvers at Matthews Ridge in those days, and American Green Berets that came in with the body cleanup teams that spent the period of the 5 days murdering people, rounding them up in the jungle. The original reports were all 408 dead
and then 700 flee into the woods. And the military said, first, the Guyanese can't count. Second, that it was bodies on top of bodies, though how you start with 408 and end up with 915 and say that the 400 covered the 500 makes no sense. They said bodies in little piles. They even said at the end, after they'd been there for 6 days, that they forgot to go around to the back of the pavilion and there were 500 bodies back there. I mean, this was the final official explanation, but these people were being killed. Yes, smaller in this room.
There's an old junkie from Detroit who was a survivor of Jonestown. The guy said he hid under the...
Odell Rhodes?
His name. What happened to him? Where is he now?
I don't know where all the survivors are. Many of them survived because they cooperated with the plan and were meant to survive. That's the case with the basketball team and other people.
They were off somewhere.
Well, they eventually got to Georgetown and eventually came back to the United States. Some of them were out on a ship. The ones that were on the boat with Blakey went to Trinidad. Then they went to Panama and emptied a $5 million bank account in Credit Suisse. And then they went to Grenada. They set up shop in Grenada, I believe in the mental hospital there, with Dr. Bourne and his father, who worked in primate research with MK Ultra. And Bourne set up all the methadone programs in the United States for the Rockefellers. And I think they were experimenting on the mental patients because that's the only building bombed in the invasion of Grenada. And there's 180 people in the inmates in the psychiatric institution murdered, dumped into a mass grave, and then the U.S. was going to send $400 million to rebuild the hospital. I mean, they were going to make it a better unit to experiment on people after they got the right government in.
Early on, a cocaine smuggling operation, because I believe
there were drugs and guns being smuggled in and out, and there were relations of mercenaries. Some of these killers that were taken in and out of Angola. The CIA-backed UNITA forces by Blakey, Iran mercenaries, and they did run guns and drugs, but the operation was primarily an extension of MK Ultra. People were taken off the streets here in San Francisco, out of the welfare rolls, from the elderly homes, from the psychiatric institutions, from the prisons. Children were given as wards of the court and turned over into their control. They put them in buses. They took them to Miami, and I talked to an air traffic controller when they landed in Guyana. All of the blacks were bound and gagged coming off of the plane. People 5 miles away didn't even know there were blacks at Jonestown. All they had ever seen of People's Temple were the white crew that was running it, going in and out of the cities. They were buying Guyanese babies from women wherever they could give a blanket or something for a baby and taking them back in there, and there was massive experimentation. There were enough drugs on site to drug the population of Georgetown, Guyana, over 120,000 for more than a year for a population of 1,200 people in this camp. And Dr. Schacht, who I believe survived, he's not in the first death list. He's added to the second. I think he's related to Hjalmar Schacht, the Mike Reichsman death list. He's added to the second. I think he's related to Hjalmar Schacht, the Mike Reichs Minister of Finance, who developed the phrase "Arbeit macht frei," work makes you free at the Auschwitz camp. And they came to Houston. That's where the Schacht family ended up. They were the big bankers for Hitler. And this guy is from Houston, and he was not a doctor. He was described as doing, suturing on wounds without anesthesia and all kind of sadistic things. And they had medical tags. You can see even in Time magazine medical tags on the people. But an order came down from Zbigniew Brzezinski through Haig to Robert Pastor on site to strip bodies of all identification. Where the Schacht family ended up. They were the big bankers for Hitler. And this guy is from Houston, and he was not a doctor. He was described as doing, suturing on wounds without anesthesia and all kind of sadistic things. And they had medical tags. You can see even in Time magazine medical tags on the people. But an order came down from Zbigniew Brzezinski through Haig to Robert Pastor on site to strip bodies of all identification and tags. Then the bodies are left in the sun to rot so that no fingerprints, no identification can be done from the tags, and no autopsy can be done, fluid or otherwise, by the time they get back to the United States. So you can never find out what killed them or how many drugs they had in the body. They had one footlocker there with 11,000 doses of Thorazine. And the drugs that are described are the exact drugs that were used for 30 years in MK Ultra in the different control scenarios.